Picture this. You're an engineer, navigating the eerie silence of a seemingly abandoned spaceship. The lights flicker, strange sounds echo through the halls, and before you know it, grotesque alien creatures are leaping out of the shadows. This is Dead Space, a survival horror game that redefined terror in gaming when it was released in 2008. With its chilling atmosphere, unique dismemberment mechanics, and intense story, Dead Space quickly became a modern classic. Today, we'll be exploring the spine-tingling world of Dead Space, looking at its development, gameplay innovations, and its lasting impact on the survival horror genre. We'll also take a look at the career of its creator, Glenn Schofield. So dim the lights, brace yourself, and join us as we dissect Dead Space on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 216th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people that have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world and its legacy. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the world of Dead Space, which was first released on October 14, 2008, and the career of its creator, Glenn Schofield. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who also insists on using a plasma cutter to solve his everyday problems. He's my brother, Rob Casson. So, Rob, I know you insist on using a plasma cutter, but in a survival situation, would it be the plasma cutter, or if you had a choice between that and a flamethrower, which would it be and why?
Ooh, you have to go with the flamethrower in that situation, Dave. A plasma cutter is great and all, but then you got to carry a generator and an air compressor. It's a lot of extras where, I mean, yes, you have a tank for the flamethrower's propellant, but I feel that's a lot less than a freaking generator and an air
So,
compressor.
if this was the future and the plasma cutter was powered by, say, a battery, would that propel it to the front of the flamethrower?
It'd still be tough because, I mean, you can get some good range on those cutters, but not quite the same as a flamethrower. Just not quite that much reach.
All right, Rob. Well, flamethrower it is then, huh?
Flamethrower it is.
Yeah, I think I'd choose a plasma cutter. I think it's a lot more versatile of a tool, personally. So, we're probably also thinking about it differently, though. You've never played this before, have you?
I have not, Dave.
So, one of the draws to Dead Space is that the enemies die by being dismembered. Headshots don't work on Dead Space's enemies. You have to take off one or more of their limbs before they die. And that's where the plasma cutter comes into play. And so, like, I'm thinking about, well, damn, I want a gun that literally I shoot and it dismembers someone and renders them immobile. And I would take that over the flamethrower. I don't know why, but I just think that'd be better personally.
Well, if people are coming, it depends on what kind of people you're up against or what kind of adversary. Because if they're slow moving and all that, great, plasma cutter can work. But if these people are running after you with a knife or something, you want that reach.
You definitely want that reach. All right. Well, before I teach you about Glenn Schofield and Dead Space, why don't you share with our listeners what else has happened during this week in gaming history?
Kicking it off on October 16th, 1923, Walt Disney and Roy Disney founded the Walt Disney Company, originally starting as an animation studio. Over the decades, Disney became a global entertainment powerhouse, expanding into various industries, including video games. Disney's contribution to video games began in the 1980s with early arcade and console games based on their iconic characters, such as Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. The company continued to shape the gaming landscape with beloved titles like DuckTales for the NES and the Kingdom Hearts series, a collaboration with Square Enix that blended Disney characters and worlds with rich, action packed RPG gameplay. Disney has also influenced mobile gaming and interactive entertainment with the Disney Infinity series, blending physical toys with digital play. Their impact on gaming has been significant, blending the magic of Disney storytelling with engaging, interactive experiences across generations.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Disney has changed the media landscape, right?
Oh, absolutely.
At first with actual Disney characters, and then they bought Marvel, and then they bought Star Wars, and they have just continued to impact culture. And luckily, that has translated into some pretty great video game experiences. You know, we've gotten Spider-Man, and we've gotten, you know, really great Star Wars games, really great Star Wars games, you know. We just got our first open world Star Wars game that's decent. So, um, Disney's a pretty important part of video game influence our culture throughout the years. There, that's what I wanted to say. Good talk, Dave.
Good talk, Dave. But no, I agree with you. It's very, very important. Just there's no denying it. Like you said it all, Dave. There's not much more to say after that. You took the breath right out of me.
Good, but you're gonna need to catch your breath for the next one.
I sure am, Dave. And that's because on October 18th, 1958, tennis for two was demonstrated at the Brookhaven National Laboratory by American physicist William Higginbotham. Widely considered one of the first video games ever created, Tennis for Two was designed to entertain visitors at the laboratory's annual public exhibition. The game simulated a simple tennis match on an oscilloscope screen, where two players could use controllers to hit a ball back and forth over a net. Unlike later video games, Tennis for Two was purely analog, using custom hardware built specifically for this purpose. Though it was not commercialized, Tennis for Two is remembered as a pioneering moment in the history of interactive entertainment, predating more well known earlier video games like Pong and Space War.
By 20 years, roughly, actually 15 years, right?
Yeah, and that's quite a big jump. But it wasn't commercially available, so people might just not consider it or just not even really think about it because you couldn't buy it, you didn't know about it. But still, big contribution right there.
Very true.
On October 14th, 1981, Nintendo released Game & Watch Egg, another entertaining entry into the Game & Watch series developed by Gunpei Yokoi. In Egg, players control a wolf who must catch eggs rolling down 4 chutes before they hit the ground and break. The player moves the wolf left and right to catch the eggs in a basket, while the game becomes increasingly challenging as the speed and frequency of the eggs increase. The gameplay requires quick reflexes and precise timing to ensure none of the eggs are dropped. Egg exemplifies the straightforward yet addictive gameplay that defined the Game & Watch series, further cementing Nintendo's reputation for creating engaging and fun handheld gaming experiences. And we learned all about Game & Watch Line back in episode 209, so go check it out if you'd like to learn more.
Go check it out for sure. It's the beginning of the handheld gaming revolution.
That it was.
Next one's a favorite.
Maybe for one of us, Dave. And with that, October 15th, 1997, Ensemble Studios and Microsoft released Age of Empires for PC, a real time strategy game that would go on to become one of the most influential titles in the genre. Set across multiple ancient civilizations, Age of Empires allowed players to control various historical factions as they built cities, gathered resources, and waged war. The game was praised for its blend of historical accuracy and strategic depth, offering a variety of gameplay modes, including single player campaigns and multiplayer battles. Age of Empires introduced many players to the RTS genre and laid the groundwork for future installments, helping to establish a series as a cornerstone in strategy gaming. Its success led to multiple sequels and expansions, cementing its legacy as a defining title in the world of real time strategy games.
One of my absolute favorite games of all time.
And one of my games of all time.
I'm pretty sure I have it. Not pretty sure. It's on the schedule for this week next year. So we'll finally get a chance to talk about it.
Well, there you go. So stick around and you'll hear it in 52 more episodes. On October 13th, 2008, 2D Boy released World of Goo for PC, a critically acclaimed indie puzzle game that quickly captured the hearts of players with its innovative gameplay and charming presentation. The game involves using living balls of goo to build structures, such as towers and bridges, in order to navigate through various levels filled with obstacles and challenges. World of Goo was praised for its unique physics based mechanics, creative level design, and distinctive art style, all set to a whimsical and evocative soundtrack. The game's success was a significant moment for independent game development, demonstrating how small studios could create impactful, memorable experiences. Worlds of Goo went on to win numerous awards and was later ported to various platforms, solidifying its place as a beloved classic in the puzzle genre.
That was one of the first, I should say, earliest games that I ever remember hearing attached to the concept of indie gaming. Um, period. I mean, that was not a phrase that was thrown around. And I think that came out and Limbo came out and what was the one where you had to find puzzle pieces and it had a time mechanic? I don't remember, but there
Professor
were
Layton,
no. It was another
I
one of
know.
those like small team indie games.
I
Anyway,
Spy.
no, there was a handful of games that came out that just at that time, World War was one of them, where they were just made by these small teams, or in the case of the others, one person teams, and I had never really heard the phrase indie games. That's about the time I remember when it started to take off, and yeah, that was definitely one of those games that helped people realize that indie gaming was a viable medium for sure. And that was an excellent game. You ever play World of Goo?
I cannot say that I have, Dave.
Oh, that was an excellent puzzle game. So, excellent puzzle game. All right, what's next?
Last up for this week, on October 17th, 2013, the Stanley Parable was officially released for Microsoft Windows, developed by Galactic Cafe. Originally a mod for Half Life 2, the Stanley Parable evolved into a standalone game that quickly gained a cult following for its unique narrative driven experience and thought provoking gameplay. The game centers on Stanley, an office worker who discovers that his coworkers have mysteriously disappeared, prompting him to explore his environment. Guided by a narrator, players make choices that influence the direction of the story, with the game offering multiple endings and a variety of existential themes. The Stanley Parable was praised for its clever writing, dark humor, and its deconstruction of traditional video game storytelling, making players question the nature of choice and control in games. Its innovative approach to interactive narrative earned widespread critical acclaim and cemented its status as a groundbreaking title in indie gaming. We told its story back in episode 101. So go check it out if you'd like to learn more. And with that, Dave, nothing more for this week in gaming history.
Nothing more. Well, except for the story.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, you got me there.
Yeah.
So with that, why don't you tell people about today's topic?
So Glenn Schofield grew up in the suburbs of northern New Jersey. His father was in the construction business and instilled a strong work ethic into Glenn at a young age. In a 2013 Forbes interview, Glenn said, "I've been drawing my whole life, and at 15, my father told me that if I was going to be an artist, then I better get the best possible art education. Art was a far field from construction, but my father was supportive as long as I worked hard at it." So he ended up going to school for an education based in both fine arts and business, earning a Business of Fine Arts from Pratt Institute and later on a MBA from Golden Gate University. When Schofield was asked about gaming influences in a 2011 Gamer Fit interview, yeah, dude's kind of swole, Schofield said, "I have owned every gaming system. It's hard to say which game sparked my interest in gaming. I go way back to Asteroids, Moon Patrol, etc. A couple of early games that influenced me were Treasure's Gunstar Heroes, Insomniac's Disruptor, and the Contra series. We've done the Contra series before early on in this in our little podcasting career."
Very true.
So Glenn Schofield began his development career working for Absolute Entertainment, a video game publisher based out of Glen Rock, New Jersey. Prior to that, he did some freelance art work, illustration, but he didn't get into video games until here with Absolute Entertainment. More specifically, he worked at the development house of Absolute Entertainment. It was called Imagineering. Clever, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
His first credit in the gaming industry was as the art director. Literally, the credit is art director slash lead artist on the 1992 platforming title Barbie Game Girl, released for the Nintendo Game Boy. So his first game he ever worked on the art for was a Barbie game. And one of the things of Imagineering, their specialty was licensed properties. As part of Imagineering, Glenn worked on bringing many licensed properties to various video game consoles during that era, which is pretty much the Game Boy and NES. They include Swamp Thing. They did a Simpsons game. They did The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. They made a Home Alone title. They made a Ren and Stimpy title. There was a Goofy game in the mix there. And there is an NES game that based on a TV show, Home Improvement. They made that as well. So just a bunch of, TV and pretty much all TV and movie properties, huh?
Yeah, and some absolute bangers in there.
Yeah, they brought these TV and movie properties um, to video games, and they did a good job at it. Well, I mean, as good as you can do. There's always a stigma associated with licensed properties. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and literally, the rate that they did it was insane. Between 1992 and 1995, when Schofield was the art director, they worked on 9 titles that he was the art director on in those 3 years, and he has credit for an artist on 3 more. So 12 games between 92 and 95, he has game credits on as part of Imagineering. So that's the other part about licensed game. They were churning them out like it was literally their job because it was, but licensed games were notorious as games that they just churned out in 3 or 4 months and never thought much more on.
Mm-hmm.
In 1995, however, the licensed fund ended. Absolute Entertainment went bankrupt and it closed its doors, so it was time to move on. So Schofield moved over to a company called Crystal Dynamics. It is a development company that is best known nowadays for the absolute banger of a reboot series of the Tomb Raider. They did the Tomb Raider reboot, which are phenomenal games if you've never played them. The modern Tomb Raiders are excellent, excellent games. But there are two other series that the studio is really well known for, and in both cases, Schofield had played an active role in their development. In 1997, he was the game director on two games. One was called Gex 3D, and the other was Gex 3. They Gex was a platforming video game series that was popular in the mid 90s. In fact, Gex himself served as the mascot for Crystal Dynamics up until about the year 2000. So through the mid 90s when they were making Gex games, because I think the first one was like 93, 94, Gex was the face of Crystal Dynamics. He's a gecko. It's a platforming series. Yeah. They haven't made one since 97, so I guess it's not that topical anymore. Did you ever play any of those?
No, nope, do not ring a bell, Dave.
Mm. In 2002, Schofield also took the helm of the other flagship series that was developed by the studio, and that is the Legacy of Kain series. Excellent, excellent series about a vampire. He acted as the game director for a game in a series called Legacy of Kain Blood Omen 2. And in between these two titles, admittedly, he helped create a number of other games. They made an action adventure title in 1999 called Akuji the Heartless. There was Mad Dash Racing. They went back to his licensed roots and made a game called Walt Disney World Quest Magical Racing Tour.
Hell
Ooh.
yeah.
During this period, when he was working on Gex and Legacy of Kain and all these games, he climbed the ranks of leadership. During his time at Crystal Dynamics, he eventually became a vice president of the studio. But his time at Crystal Dynamics would come to an end, and at this point in Schofield's career, he joined, of all things, Electronic Arts, eventually becoming the general manager of one of their development studios called EA Redwood Shores.
Hmm.
So in 2002, he was the executive producer on the 2003 installment of Knockout Kings, which is literally called Knockout Kings 2003 boxing game. And in 2003, he acted as producer on their hack and slash action game, The Lord of the Ring: Return of the King, which is known as one of the. It's honestly one of the, not the best, but it's one of the better of the Lord of the Ring adaptation tie-ins from that trilogy. For a while, he stayed in his comfort zone of bringing licensed video games to video game consoles with his next project, which was in 2005, was a third-person shooter, James Bond 007 from Russia with Love. Fun little trivia fact for you, Rob. This game is based, obviously, on the 1963 film of the same name, which starred Sean Connery as James Bond. It is the only video game that uses his younger likeness as a character, which is fun. That's not the trivia fact I want you to take away. The trivia fact that I want y'all to take away is that it includes voice work from the actor. It was his first time reprising the role in 22 years.
Wow.
And this game is his eighth performance as James Bond across all mediums and was his final performance as James Bond before his death in 2020. So if you ever get that, he portrayed James Bond 8 times. The last time was a video game in voice acting. And his last performance as James Bond was this video game. So there's your little weird trivia. Because you know they'll ask obscure crap like that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in case it wasn't obvious, during this time, Electronic Arts wasn't really too keen on pursuing original intellectual properties, right? They were all about licensed properties or sequels because those were making all the money without the risk. People would buy them because of their familiarity with the intellectual property or the familiarity with the original game. And so you could dole out all this money to make the game knowing you were going to recoup it back, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
We still see that stuff nowadays. There are still big companies that are hesitant to invest money in original properties, original IPs because they understand the risk that is associated with them, right?
Right.
Um so that was no different back here in the mid aughts. EA was doing the same thing. So it was about this time that Electronic Arts was toying around with the idea of making another entry in the System Shock series. Now, if you don't know what System Shock is, we did a whole episode on it a few months ago in episode 207. It is a science fiction video game series that has been incredibly influential to designers all throughout the industry. It was one of the earliest games, came out about the same time. They were making System Shock 2 about when Doom and Quake and all of them were out there, except this was a more survivor horror first, shooter, more immersive that incorporated role play elements. And when you stack that up against Doom, which is a straight arcade shooter, you really have two different styles of first person shooters kind of emerging at one time. And of course, that's the style that took off. So System Shock in the annals of history isn't as well known, except by us dorks who love it and, you know, pay attention to its spiritual successors like Bioshock, so to speak. So EA owned System Shock, the IP, and they were toying around with the idea of making System Shock 3. And Schofield was really pushing for his little corner of Electronic Arts to be assigned that project. He and the team started to put together ideas for System Shock 3. The team knew what they were up against. They were making a sequel to a really well loved series, but coming in having never touched it before, right? And that's a recipe that's always going to start you out with having the fan base working against you, right? Because the fan base always wants the same people to make the same game but better. So when you come in to touch an IP that you have had never touched before, the fans are just going to start out against you. That's just a way of life.
Yeah, no, it is. Can't deny it.
So the team basically decided from the start, hey, we're gonna play through System Shock 2 from start to finish. We're gonna figure out what we want to do, write what we like about the game, write what we don't like about the game. We're gonna brainstorm all these things, and they put all their pieces together, and they started to kind of do a really rough prototype of the game. First person shooter and role playing elements, and here's kind of a story that we're thinking of. They did all of this really rough work, and that's kind of where they started, bringing their ideas, their wish lists, and a really rough outline prototype of anything to the table with the notion of convincing their overlords at Electronic Arts to allow them the privilege of working on the series. But in the midst of this process in 2005, everything changed. A video game came out that legitimately took the industry by storm. It took this team by storm. And because of it, they found themselves wanting to go in a completely different direction. So when Resident Evil 4 came out, designer Ben Wanat said in a 2017 PC Gamer interview, we were just all struck by it. We were all playing and we were like, holy shit, this is a really awesome game. They're actually trying to tell a story. They've got some cool cinematics. The gameplay systems are fixing a lot of problems, bringing it into this action realm, but keeping this intense horror feel to it. It was this amazing combination of, oh, the enemies were so freaking cool, and horror and all this fun stuff. Um, Playing this installment of the Resident Evil series pretty much shifted everyone's train of thought, especially this team's. It gave them the desire to create something completely new, frankly. Schofield envisioned a game now that fused together the genres of science fiction and horror. You know, he was inspired by the science fiction film Event Horizon, and so the team went back to the drawing board basically. At this point, they had a project. They nicknamed it Rancid Moon, which I kind of liked. Sounds like a cool band name.
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't roll. You wouldn't want to rock out as Rancid Moon.
I mean, it depends on what kind of music they have. It could be really good. It could be kind of stinky.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I'm really intrigued by that statement. What would constitute a stinky band named Rancid Moon? If they played what, would it be a shit name?
Country.
A country band named Rancid Moon. Okay. I would vote pop. Like if Taylor Swift was like, from this day on, I'm now, you can now call me Rancid Moon. Probably not the best marketing.
No, that probably wouldn't work so well either.
All right. So on the flip side, what kind of band would be badass as Rancid Moon?
Like grunge rock, punk.
Not heavy?
Yeah, I don't think as much. No,
Why? Because Rancid's more emo?
I just, I don't know. I don't know. It really has that grunge vibe to me.
I don't know. My brain went to heavy when I heard Rancid Moon. I think that'd be a badass theme for just like a hardcore rock band.
Mayhaps.
So we've got Rancid Moon here, the kick-ass grunge rock band, aka video game project, and the team really saw this idea that was shaping up as an opportunity for EA Redwood Shores to branch out into original properties, right? Because up until this point, Knockout Kings and James Bond and everything, those were all licensed properties. And when you work on licensed properties, it's not that you're not doing good work, but you're not doing the same work as someone who's making something up from scratch, right?
Right.
And so in their mind, this was finally a chance for them to establish themselves as they called it, a proper game studio. You know, someone who could essentially make something out of nothing the way they wanted to participate in game development. So starting out, Schofield pitched a scenario that was similar to the movie Escape from New York. It would be set in a prison in outer space, basically a prison planet in outer space, probably a rancid moon. And well, the team really liked the space element. They really disliked the prison setting. So that was thrown out pretty quick. Unlike many other game productions at the time, they decided that they wanted to have the story defined from the get go and then build the levels and the objectives around that. You know, that wasn't really how it was done back then. You would prototype a level and wedge a story into it and everything as you went along. You know, just kind of find a way to put the pieces together. But this one, they wanted the story to come first and foremost. Schofield takes all this legwork, this early legwork, and he pitches what they have to their overlords at Electronic Arts. This is early 2006. And EA honestly pushes back for obvious reasons. It's too costly, it's too risky. You know, let's stick to licensed properties. It's been working for us. You've been making us money. Uh, you know, we're not sure if this is the right way to go. But Schofield loved the idea, loved the opportunity, knew what it could mean for the studio, for him, for the team. And so he was persistent with the upper heads at Electronic Arts. and the team was given 3 months to create a prototype. So at this point, they got the 3 months to create a prototype, and they have to work on Rancid Moon. Up until this point, they had System Shock 3 down. Going into this notion, the team frequently referred to it as Resident Evil in space, which is fair considering where they got the idea from, right?
Yeah, it's pretty fair.
And at this point, they had to make changes. System Shock 3 was a first person shooter. They had to convert it over a third person format, like Resident Evil 4 with that over the shoulder camera. And they knew that as they built this game, what they really wanted at the core of their design was immersion. They wanted to build a world that the player felt like it was a part of and pretty much find a way to never take you out of it. And frankly, that's one of the things I've always loved the most about Dead Space. I played Dead Space when it came out. It was a game we were hyped about. My best friend Eric and I, who Rob and I just saw over the weekend, I believe we played this together, if I remember correctly. And we were hyped about this one because it was going to be literally Resident Evil in space. It was going to be the next survivor horror game in a sci-fi setting, which we're big fans of. So I remember they hyped the immersion, they hyped the immersion, they hyped the immersion. And your main character wears a suit, and on the back of the suit, it visually shows you your health. Like it's part of the suit, and like there's bars, and when you're at full health, it's all the way up, and when you lose health, it goes down. So it's literally like your health bar is integrated into the suit. There is no hit points in the corner or inventory in the corner or anything like that. Like there is no, we call it a HUD, right? Graphical user interface. There's no HUD on the screen. There's no other information on the screen. Everything that you need to know about what's going on is part of your player or part of the universe. And that was part of them building the immersion. And that was always one of the things that I particularly like. I fell in love with this game right from the get go. It literally, in terms of immersion, it's again, one of the best games at it. I think it does a phenomenal job at it. So to add to that, they didn't take the route of traditional cutscenes. The game never cuts away to do a traditional cutscene. All of the cutscenes are in engine and based on where you are. You find audio logs. They play in the background as you're walking, so it never takes you away from what you're doing, like an audio book would. Everything that this team did is all specifically around immersion. And again, as a fan, I'm a big fan, big fan. The team the team was just dead set on drawing players into the world and not giving any opportunities to be pulled out of it. And as they went through defining more of the plot and the setting and so on and so forth, they just kept designing the world in a way that incorporated the sense of immersion and influences from elsewhere. Like I said, Event Horizon was kind of the original influence. The main character, who's Isaac Clarke, his struggle, they used Ellen Ripley from Alien. His struggle is comparable to Ripley from Alien. The people that are affected by, the virus or whatever it is in the game that causes people to act weird, which is part of the story, they suffer dementia. That's also suffered by characters in a movie called Solaris. That's where they got that from. There's an immense sense of loneliness and desperation that came from one of my favorite movies, Danny Boyle's Sunshine. Definitely felt in this game, which is probably why I've always been really fond of it. Even Isaac Clarke. Isaac Clarke is a reference to two science fiction authors, Isaac Asimov and Arthur Clarke. Everything about this game, it's an homage to science fiction in so many different ways. You can tell that it was a labor of love for this team. Ain't no doubt about it in any way, shape, or form.
Right on.
Labor of love.
Yeah, yeah. If that's your thing, man, if it's fun to you, that's all that matters.
Is it fun to you?
I don't know.
I know. So Schofield lays down the groundwork and the team is working it out, and they basically hand off the story to a team of three writers. They work collaboratively to lay down the background lore, to lay the groundwork of the story, to just write out the entire scenario. They added balance. Religion was added to the game to balance out the science fiction elements. That's the people who are starting to change over. Attributed to religion and cool part to that story. And they made Isaac a non-military person. He's an engineer. He's surrounded by a ship with military people, and really, that's more about they wanted to appeal to players who might relate better to a non-military character, one that might not be combat trained or have that military sense. And so that's that. But aside from the great world building, and it has excellent world building. Graphics are great, world building is great, music is great, everything is great. Sound design, phenomenal. Like everything they did was towards immersion. They just did an excellent job. I'm a big fan of this and the remake, which we'll talk about momentarily. But one of the key things of this game is where Rob and I started, and that was the concept of the plasma cutter. I asked him if he'd rather use a plasma cutter or a flamethrower in the beginning. And so one of the founding design principles, one of the founding principles of the design team, rather, was this gameplay concept of strategic dismemberment. And that is the focus of severing limbs to kill enemies. So they wanted to distinguish themselves from all of the other shooters out there, which tend to focus on headshots. But in this game, headshots don't necessarily kill the creatures. Taking their head off kills them, but taking just a headshot doesn't. Literally, the way to kill pretty much every enemy in the game is you have to dismember them, one or more limbs. It's the only way to do it. Sometimes their head, honestly, most often it's not their head. Most often you take it down a leg or an arm or two. So dismemberment is the key part of this game. And it's honestly one of the more unique things about it because they most definitely distinguish themselves from other shooters because there isn't another shooter that's like that, right? It the rest of them all do focus on headshots and that. And this was a fantastic breath of fresh air in that genre at the time. And then, of course, there were elements that got cut out. They prototyped a co op multiplayer option over 3 months, but they eventually cut it afterwards to focus on making a more polished single player experience. And the team just kind of worked on this. They worked together to, you know, make this little slice of a game over 18 months, and they presented that back to EA, to say, they checked in with the overlords. So they worked on this for 18 months and they turn it in and they say, hey, this is what we're working on. We'd like you to continue to fund us, continue to let us do that. And, so far so good. They loved it. They got the approval to keep going over the next 10 months. They kept level building, kept building on the lore, kept doing all the fun stuff. And frankly, they just kept at it, making a fantastic game, one in which you go through the halls of basically a really haunting ship and you fight off the necromorphs. Rob, we've been dismembering necromorphs and navigating the terrifying halls of the ship. But it doesn't have to be scary.
What's that, Dave?
Starting your own podcast.
You're right. Dead Space might be terrifying, but the idea of setting up a podcast can feel just as overwhelming. Where do you even begin?
Well, that's where Zencaster comes in. Zencaster is an all in one podcasting platform that makes it easy to record high quality audio and video straight from your web browser. No complicated setups, no expensive equipment. Just click and record, and you're good to go.
So you're telling me I could record a podcast with 4K video and professional audio without needing to survive the horrors of a tech nightmare?
Exactly. And Zencaster's post production tools take it even further. They automatically remove background noise, balance out your audio, and get rid of those awkward pauses or filler words like It's like having a team of engineers on hand, like Isaac Clarke, no less, all with a single click.
That sounds smoother than using stasis on a charging necromorph. But how do you get your podcast out into the world?
Well, that's the best part. Zencaster also lets you distribute your podcasts to all the major platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts directly from their site. It's an all in one solution that makes podcasting as simple as possible.
I'm sold. Sounds like it's time to start that horror podcast I've been thinking about. Can our listeners give it a try?
Absolutely. Just head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane. You'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're recording your first episode or leveling up your current podcast, Zencaster makes it easy.
Sounds like it's easier than surviving the USG Ishimura. So, what are you waiting for, listeners?
What are you waiting for? If you've got a great podcast idea or just want to make your current podcast better, head over to Zencaster and use our offer code MemoryCardLane, and you can get 30% off your first month. Start your podcasting journey today.
Now, let's get back to fighting for our lives in Dead Space.
So, needless to say, Dead Space was incredibly successful. Because of that, EA Redwood Shores was rebranded actually as Visceral Games. Kind of funny considering it is a gruesome Visceral game. And they were allowed to move out from under the EA Games banner, so to speak. It essentially became its own division under EA. It became the first of what EA kind of terms genre studios, so to speak. They are studios that are solely made to develop a specific genre, in this case, third person action games, which they continue to do following the successful formula that they used for Dead Space. They were able to make The Godfather 2. They made another action game called Dante's Inferno. There are two more Dead Space titles, Dead Space 2 and 3. They made an Army of Two title. They made one of the expansions for Battlefield 3, I believe. They also made Battlefield Hardline. Did you ever play Hardline?
I did, yes.
All right, so Visceral made Hardline. Towards the end of its tenure, the studio was working on a pirate-themed game called codenamed Jamaica. But this is about the time that Ubisoft announced Assassin's Creed Black Flag. So also at the same time, Disney shut down LucasArts, which we just talked about last week, ironically. And so EA quickly kind of made a deal to develop Star Wars themed games for them. EA decided to cancel Jamaica, which was their pirate themed game, in favor of developing a new Star Wars title. So Viscera pretty much pitched to EA the same idea that they used for Jamaica. They wanted to make an open world game, but instead of pirates, now they were going to focus it around space scoundrels, so to speak, which really sounds like the EA game that just came out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't the open world Star Wars game that I can't think of the name of right now? Literally, aren't you space scoundrels in it?
Yeah, I believe
Uh,
so.
so yeah, so they pitched this game and EA was on board. And so Jamaica became a project called Ragtag, as in, ragtag group of people. And the team honestly worked on that for a few years. Not even joking, a few years. And then the market shifted, and EA decided that they were going to consolidate things. So they shut down Visceral Games altogether, and they reassigned the Star Wars project to another studio. So Visceral Games was shut down actually 77 years ago this week, October 17th, 2017, exactly. So, um, so Visceral Games was no more. Now, to his credit, Glenn Schofield ended up working with Visceral until about 2009. And then he left them with one of the other guys at Visceral to form a company called Sledgehammer Games. And as part of Sledgehammer Games, Glenn was the producer of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, and Call of Duty World War II. Most recently, he was the director on another science fiction horror game called The Callisto Protocol, which he considers to be a spiritual successor to the Dead Space series. Fun fact about Callisto that I just learned, Rob, that might be interesting to you. Callisto Protocol was originally conceived as a game set in the PUBG universe. But before they finished it, it was decided that they would convert it to its own intellectual property. So I didn't even know they were developing games in the PUBG universe.
I was just gonna say I didn't know there was a universe outside of just PUBG.
Right,
So that's
exactly.
crazy
Exactly.
already.
Um so Dead Space, a series, Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3, but last year we got a remake in January of 2023. It is a remake of the first game. It pretty much follows the story to a T. It's rebuilt in a modern engine, so it looks like a modern game. It is it has some changes. You know, in the original, the main character was silent. Now he has a voice. There was cut content from the first that they added into it. And they made some quality of life changes too. Like originally you used to have to build blueprints and build like the weapons and stuff in the game, and now you just kind of obtain them through the story. So they definitely they learned from design changes that people more prefer throughout the years they added in the game. But at its core, it is still the same fantastic story, scary ass enemies, great gameplay. Like everything that I loved about Dead Space was in the remake. I played the remake and I couldn't. There's a squeak in my voice. That means I'm excited. I couldn't recommend it enough if you're a fan of survival horror games. I do think this is one of probably the top 5 games in that genre for me personally, and it's worth playing if you're a fan of survival horror games, and that's my take. So okay,
Fair enough.
and that's Dead Space in a nutshell. Glenn Schofield made it, and it was going to be System Shock, and then it was going to be Resident Evil in space, and Resident Evil in space is what we got, but better, because I legitimately think that it's better than some of the Resident Evils. So,
Bold
yay!
words, Dave.
True words, absolutely true words. So, but speaking of Resident Evil and PUBG and anything else we've talked about in this, there's a lot of history in here. In the beginning, we talked about Tennis for Two. We talked about Game & Watch. We have a lot of other episodes that you can check out some of these topics. And of course, you can always check out our old episodes by going to our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our upcoming episodes, a link to our Discord where you can hang out with Dave and I, a link to our Patreon where you can get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our podcast, and you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. So each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history, right? It can be about a game, it can be about a console, it can be about a technology. I just pick one thing that is relevant to the current week in gaming history, and I write about it, we talk about it. While doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. And one of my favorite parts about doing this podcast is every week when I sit down to research a topic, I inevitably learn new things. Sometimes I learn everything about a game I never knew before. Sometimes I learn fun trivia facts like Sean Connery's last appearance as James Bond was in a video game, and it was his 8th appearance as James Bond. Nonetheless, every week we learn something. I learn something and I teach you guys stuff, and it's a fantastic cycle of teaching and learning. And in recognition of it and how that's our focus every week, we like to talk about what we've taken away each week. So, Rob, what was your favorite takeaway? What did you learn today?
Well, I learned all about the Dead Space series, but I think my favorite takeaway had to be that it was, I mean, literally Resident Evil in space, that it was
Yeah.
inspired by that. Um, I've seen a lot of videos of the game, although I've never played it, but I did always have that kind of Resident Evil esque vibe, but obviously in space. And just knowing that's actually like the biggest inspiration for it's just hilarious, but it's fitting.
It's just so much better. I remember it's also one of my favorite depictions of space itself because there's parts in the game where you go into parts of the ship that are exposed to space, and they're silent like it would be. Like there's no like sound doesn't carry in space, right? Because it's a vacuum.
Mhm.
And that's in the game. Like you walk into these and it's so freaking airy because like the sound goes away and your movement goes away, and like it's the coolest depiction of so many things, including that. Honestly, this is a fantastic game. It really genuinely is. So, yep.
Well, yeah, I'll have to take your word for it, but at some point, I hope to play it and experience it for myself. So, but that's it for me. Was that your takeaway, or is there something else, Dave?
I was gonna say the Resident Evil in space, but more or less for me, I never knew that this started out as a System Shock. Like that's where the whole thing started, was that they were going to make a System Shock 3. So that was fascinating to learn, and then to learn that Resident Evil just completely changed everything. Like you hear about how like that game dropped, very influential game in a very influential time. But when you start seeing stories like this where it's right in front of you, it makes it really start to sink in. It's really interesting. So I really liked learning the origins of this game for sure.
Right on.
Alrighty, well that'll do it for Dead Space. Rob, before I wrap it up and take it into next week, is there anything that you'd like to add to today's episode?
As always, I want to take one quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us, and we hope you enjoy getting to learn about your favorite topics of the week with us.
That is true. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our chilling journey through the world of Dead Space. From its innovative dismemberment mechanics to its terrifying atmosphere, Dead Space remains a shining example of how to do survivor horror right. Whether you're replaying it or experiencing it for the first time, we hope that today's episode has given you a deeper appreciation of this modern classic. Next week, though, we're leaving behind the dark corridors of space and we're heading to the gritty streets of Liberty City as we dive into Grand Theft Auto 3. Definitely can't say you've never played this one, huh?
Yeah, maybe I can.
Oh, okay. This groundbreaking game redefined open world gaming, giving players unparalleled freedom to explore, cause chaos, and shape their own story. We'll explore how GTA 3 changed the gaming landscape forever and set the stage for one of the most successful franchises in gaming history. So buckle up and join us for a wild ride on next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Scooby dum ba 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 da dum ba ba bum doo ba.